All right, can everyone hear me? I am not using my microphone. Hello? Yes. Okay. Oh, good. All right. So welcome everyone. Week 6. We have this week and next week, and we're done. Oh, okay. That's why I check some people do use other people's stuff. Thank you, Jameson. Um, yes, so we have this week and next week, and then we're basically done. We're gonna be done with classes. So that'll be really quick, I feel like. On the one hand, I feel like it's really quick. On the other hand, I'm like, this has been so long. Okay, so just so everyone knows, the slides this week are going to look a little bit different, just because I haven't been able to update them this week. So, um, sorry if they're kind of, I don't know what the word is, overwhelming. So, feedback on the ceramic object assignment, everyone did really well. The only thing that I noticed was, even though in class it specifically said that the ceramic objects, they look nice and they're very decorated. But they still had a function. Sorry, I'm just making sure some students are emailing. Okay. So I said even though they look really nice, they still had a very particular function when they were created. And even though I said that, many people still put that they thought it would have just been decorative. So in the future, particularly when you're doing your final, remember that no ceramic object that you look at that's from the Goryeo period or any time, except for maybe contemporary, was ever just decorative. It was never just decorative. They always had a purpose. They were always made to do something. So that's really my only feedback on it. Otherwise, everyone did really well. I can tell we got back on track, especially with how to describe something and like what's important about writing the description. I think everyone did it really, really improved. Okay, so are there any questions about the visual analysis assignment? Yes, I think so too. Yay, I'm happy about that, especially. Okay, I think it was pretty straightforward. So we only really have a couple of assignments left, which is really great, right? Because we only have the 2 weeks left. So you have your plenary response is going to be due this Friday by 11:59 p.m. like usual. And then next week, already we have the final exam. So yeah, so the midterm is like, it's really only about the 3 weeks, but it's 4 weeks because we have the introduction week and the first week. And so it feels like the final happens a lot faster after the midterm, but it's still just 3 weeks of content. And so it's the same format as the previous exam. I'll show you what it looks like next week and everything, and it'll be the same amount of time. Wednesday at 7:16 p.m. it will open up, and it will not be due until 11:59 p.m. on that Sunday. So the only thing about the final that's different is that I am not allowed to accept assignments after March 10th for this course. So if you're one of those people who for the midterm you were like, oh, I know it was a lot of time, but I just didn't organize the time right, blah, blah, blah. You don't get the full week to turn it into me. You only have until that Friday to turn it into me. So basically you need to turn it in. And if you don't have it in by Friday, you have a 0 for it. So a lot of you, not a lot of you, but those of you who, you're like, oh, I'm that person who's been having a hard time hitting deadlines. This is one of those deadlines that it's kind of like you don't have much leeway with it. Okay, so are there any questions about the remaining assignments? I will show you the final next week, which is about due dates or anything like that. Again, I think we're pretty straightforward. Same as usual, right? Okay. So Today, what we're talking about is so the final is still due on Sunday. It's the plenary response this week that's due on Friday. The exams are always due on Sunday, and the responses are always due on Friday. So the exam is still, you still have that for like a third or a fourth of the day. Does that answer your question, Nun? Yes. Okay. We're talking about today contemporary art. Actually, I changed it to contemporary art from Korea, or contemporary artists from Korea. So my question to you is, after doing the readings, and a lot of you mentioned these two words, you mentioned contemporary and you mentioned global. Well, my question is, what do those two words mean to you? What kind of ideas are you getting behind these two words? It's particularly contemporary. And I'll give you a hint. Contemporary and modern are not the same thing. Especially in art, they are not the same thing. So what do you think the contemporary and global, what does that mean? Okay, so that's definitely a part of it, right, Gabrielle? There's kind of going beyond what's considered quote unquote traditional or typical of a particular people. Very good. Yes, happening right now. Yes. I think that's a really great way of thinking about contemporary. Yes, Piper. Currently, I think currently or recently, those are very good as well. Currently, recently, right now. Right, exactly. Very good. Yeah, contemporary actually means happening at the same time. Like if I say contemporaneous, which I use that word a lot when I'm writing, because that means it's happening at the same time, right? And so if I say something is contemporary, I'm inferring that it's happening at the same time as right now. And then in art history, particularly, we usually use it to mean happening at the same time as right now or really recently. Like one thing about contemporary is that people who are alive right now lived through it recently, right? So that's kind of something about contemporary to think about, is there's people who are living right now who experienced it, right? Yeah, belonging or occurring in the present, exactly, good. So then what is global? What does global seem to mean? I think a few people said things. Yeah, transcending culture, a particular culture. What else about it? The whole world. Yeah, this is very, the idea of the whole world is something to break down, right? Worldwide, yes. Good, yes, the whole of something, a group of things. Okay. So do you think that the whole world can really be encompassed by global? Yeah, okay, good. Courtney, throughout the world. I like throughout the world, right? So it's something that's happening multiple places, right, at once. Yeah, good. Yes, and interaction between different people in different settings instead of just your own. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. It's not necessarily everyone in the world, but it's definitely like something that's occurring in multiple places and between different peoples or different cultures. And then it's contemporary at this time or happening at the same time. So the term you'll hear is global contemporary, which I think is something I want to work into more, calling this topic, right? Because like these two artists who we're going to talk about today, Ipur and Sado-ho, who a lot of people mentioned in their thing, yeah, they're from Korea, but the work that they do isn't really in Korea that much. Like it's global, right? They do it in North America, in Japan, in Europe, right? So it's different from a lot of, they have a different kind of experience and way of making art or doing and thinking about their art than some of the people who we've talked about so far. Okay. So does that make sense? Just make sure you understand modern and contemporary are not the same thing. So modern can mean recent, but it's really referring to that idea of modernization that we've been talking about consistently, right, throughout class. Like this idea of coming into the present, what is happening, you know, developing in a certain way, economically, culturally, and that kind of a thing, and politically, right? Okay. So let's talk about Charlotte Corlick's chapter. We've read a few chapters from this book, at least one other one that I can think of, right? And we've read something else that she's written. She's one of the only people who writes a lot about Korean art in English, which is why we read her a lot. So how does she seem to frame the relationship between the art coming in and out of Korea from the 1990s in comparison or in relation to the 1980s? And so if you remember, a lot of you talked about this in your blog post, the 1980s is particularly in South Korea, the Minjung art is what's really defining it. But what is kind of the discrepancy between the two decades? Everyone already talked about this in the blog post, so. Yes, I think, so here's kind of the thing. I think maybe Horlick frames it like art in the 90s was personal, but do you think Minjung was personal to Minjung art was personal to a lot of the artists who were part of it, right? I think it was, yeah. I think the discrepancy, yeah, it was definitely personal, right? So remember my little saying, the personal is political, right? That definitely applies, I think, almost all the time, right? Yeah, so it's not quite, I do think that in 1990s, there's more of a idea that you should be expressing your personal experience, right? Focus less on political, social, economic. Yeah, there's definitely less. I don't, and again, I don't think, I think there's a lot of politics and social and economic, but I think that it's nuanced differently, right? There's a particular disjunction or a particular discrepancy in how politics was expressed through art in the Minjung case and in the 1990s. Yes, okay, collectiveness versus individuality is definitely important. So I would agree with that. I think so, and I think Horlick argues that, right? So Minjung art is definitely about the collective, but the 90s is more about this individual artist has this political concern and they express it for themselves, right? Good. Yes, exactly. Good. Yes, Piper, the political environment, right? Yes, good. And Lizzie, the ideological agenda. Yeah, I think we're all getting to it. Yeah, good. So like the 1980s. So the difference between the two is that the 1980s and art that was political prior to the 1990s. Good. Oh yes, Magnus had it. Has it right here. Really well set. Really well said. Was linked to a specific movement. There was a specific movement of artists and activists, and they had an agenda. Someone else used this term. Who was it? Who used this term? Yes, Lizzie said they had a specific agenda, and the art was made around that agenda. In the 1990s, it's really just individual artists, and they have their own political agendas, and there's overlap, and they're talking to each other, but there is more of that emphasis on I as an individual want to express this kind of political notion, this political idea, right? So it's not that one is more personal or more political, but rather that the nuance behind how politics and how the personal is expressed, it's different. Good. And so what does Horlick kind of situate as the reason for this shift? How did it kind of go from this collectivist and specific political movement in art to this kind of personalized political expression? And she frames it around cultural consumer versus cultural producer. Why is that? What's kind of the spark that allows this to happen? Globalization. Yeah, globalization brought about by what? So globalization was happening, right? Kind of consistently. Like the US had always been given money to South Korea. South Korea had been exporting goods, but there's kind of a particular kind of, yes, democratization, right? Democratization and the freedom of what? Freedom of what? Democratization brought freedom of speech. Yes, speech, expression, however, whatever word you want to write. There's not as much censorship anymore. There still is, but there's not as much censorship of ideas and visual culture and particular kinds of artistic expression, right? So she uses this term a lot, 386 generation. Just to explain it briefly, because she never actually explains it, I don't think, so it means people in their 30s who were in college during the 80s and were born in the 60s. That's what that means. So 386, 30 in their 30s, college during the 80s, and then born in the 60s. So essentially they lived through the Park Chung-hee era, were of the student age during the Minju movement, and then they were in their kind of middle age time during the 90s, right? So that's why that's important, or what that means. Good. And then let's talk about just some of the artworks briefly. We're only going to be, because we're only talking about two. It's like Gen X. Yeah, they don't use the term Gen X as much in Korea. It's more of like a European and like North American appellation. But yeah, so 386 is like Gen X, basically. That's exactly right. You do see like Gen Z used a lot, though, in Korean. They call it Zed. Right. Okay, so what artworks really stood out to you? Almost everyone had a different one, actually. There were a lot of different ones. Did we forget what our favorite artworks were? I think my thing is being slow. Yes, me too. I'm really interested in site-specific art and environmental art and performance. Both fall in that kind of category, right? Good. Yes. Yes, Majestic Splendor. I really like that one too. I really like ephemeral art, right? Yes. Sorry for my suffering. Do I look like a puppy? Yeah, Ebel's work, Evergreen Tower. Yes, I like that one too. It's very eye-opening. If you've ever, I think a few of us have probably lived in an apartment or a dorm in Korea, and those photographs, every single apartment or dorm looks the exact same, right? Good. Yes, Superflower. I do love that one too. I like all of the ones she introduces. Good. Yes, and Seodoho. Yeah, we're gonna talk about Seodoho's. She doesn't talk about his fabric, his memory art, but we're gonna talk about that. Good. Okay, so there are a couple of underlying arguments and assumptions that are in Horlick's chapter that kind of want to break down a little bit. So I think that this is mostly true that democracy led to pluralism, but so the assumption is that there's no kind of pluralistic art under the dictatorial regimes. But my question is, do you think that Minjung art in the 1980s, and then we never talked about the abstract painting of the 70s, but we've mentioned it a few times. But even though we talk about those as kind of like defining the decade, do you think those were like the only forms of art in Korea during that time? Probably not. Yeah, probably not. Yes, we talk about them because they were very prominent during that time, but there's always art somewhere, right, that's under the surface, right? And so that's something that Horlick kind of takes for granted, right? And there has been some research on particularly performance art. So we kind of have this canon of post-war Korean art that's centered around these abstract art and Minjung art, right? What is a canon? I don't think we've talked about this term yet. A canon. If I say there's a canon of art, canon of literature, maybe a canon of, you know, not something. So it is something that happened, but it's a particular way of understanding. It's not exactly it is related to the history or the story, related to that. Yes, very good. Yes, Daniel, this is a really good way. It's this reference that we have, that we use this particular collection of, whether it's artworks or pieces of literature, or it could be film, it could be particular songs or pieces of music, right? And we say these are the ones that belong in history, right? So if we have a canon of post-war Korean art, what it means is there's a specific pieces of art or specific arts movements that we talk about and we use to narrate what was the kind of main art or the dominant art or the most important. What we're really inferring is that these are the most important kinds of art coming out of this time. And so in this case, we have the abstract art and we have Minjung art, right? Does that make sense? Because this is something, especially when you start doing, if you decide to do more like advanced art history stuff, something you're going to critique all the time is what is the canon and why that canon is wrong, right? And so that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Okay, so we talked about that before, because if we look under the canon or beyond the canon, we do find, although we're not going to talk about it too much, there were photography movements, there were performance art movements that were happening in the 60s and 70s, but they were just underground or they're not accepted as part of the canon, right? And so the reason it's important to acknowledge that is because when we talk about like Lee Bur's art, you know, it doesn't just happen. Like Lee Bur didn't necessarily just get the idea to do this performance, right? She was probably inspired, she was inspired actually by these earlier people, right? Okay. So that's kind of just one issue to think about when we read things like that. All right. So before we talk about the artworks, I'm going to actually put the attendance question kind of early. So the attendance question today is, what song or artist or band or piece or playlist are you listening to recently? Especially, I've noticed myself, I'm starting to listen more just to like playlists rather than just particular artists or anything, which is kind of interesting. So, especially if you have Spotify or YouTube. So what are we listening to? Yes, the new Paramore album. I need to listen to that. Good. Demon Slayer. I've seen Paramore once in Cincinnati. SZA. Is that SZA? I can't remember how she spelled her name. Or is that I feel like there's a K-pop group named SZA. 070 Shake a Lot and Q. Okay, interesting. I saved the chat so I can relook at what other people are into. Fleetwood Mac. Oh yes, I like Fleetwood Mac a lot too. I love Stevie Nicks particularly. I like Fleetwood Mac though better than just Stevie Nicks' solo career. Bad Bunny, yes, who I'm seeing has gone on a date with which one of the Jenners, right? The young one, I can't remember her name. Taylor Swift, yes. Married by Alex G. And Queen Persephone by Dirty Art Club. Interesting. Okay. Not to lose. Midwest emo and hardcore. Okay, I love the sound of that. Dying for the Weekend. Ed Sheeran, good. Oh my gosh. I don't know. I know I do not know very much of these things. There's so much music. Blackpink, yes. Mitski. Good. It doesn't have to be a new thing. I listen to a lot of old music, right? Karol G, I love Karol G. So I've been listening to, so I'm a classically trained violinist. I don't know if I told anyone that, or if I've ever mentioned that, but so I listen to a lot of classical music, and I've been really fascinated by these study playlists recently, especially they pair like artworks with music and whatnot. They're kind of interesting. And then the other thing I've been revisiting new wave, 1980s. I love 80s and the 70s particularly. So I've been revisiting that a lot recently. Good. Okay. So I digress. All right, Ipur and Sadoho. So we're gonna talk about them. So let's talk about Ipur really quickly, or not really quickly, but so a lot of you mentioned how you really liked this. And I really like it too, and people talk about it. People talk about it quite a bit. But one thing we probably don't necessarily think about a lot is how particular this idea of performance art is. So what do we think performance art? If I ask you to explain what that is, what are some things you would say? What is performance art? What do you think? Jumping and running all over a stage. So is there a stage? Is there like a physical, like kind of stereotypical stage here? Let's see, putting yourself into what's being good. Yes. Okay. The use of yourself, your body. Yes. As an artist, you're using your body. That's very important. Very good, Courtney. Yes. Actions. Yes. Yes, Jessica. There's kind of actions going on, right? Good. And there's live, recorded. There's some spontaneity to it. There could be scripting to it, right? Good. Yes. Live and recorded is very important. Yeah, and artists and participants are both a part of it, right? That's very important. There's a relationship between the artist and there's participants, not just watching, but usually you're participating in some way. Good. Living piece. I like that too. There's a liveliness to it. It is definitely something that's happening, right? Yes, movement and material are both important. Yes, good. I like that. Time. Time is very important to it. It's happening. Therefore, there's this temporal aspect to it because it's going to start and it's going to end probably at some point, right? And then that's it. That's the artwork, right? Expression of the body, good. Expanded media, good. Yes, I think all of these things are very much in line with it. There's not really a strict definition to performance art. There's definitely a lot of particular things to think about, and I think we hit them all, right? The artist using their body, the relationship between the artist and the viewers is more participatory, right? The artist is doing something actively, thus it's living, and it's confined mostly by time, right? So it's happening in the moment. And then the issue that we come up with when we're trying to study performance art. What do you think is so difficult about it? Why is it hard to understand or study performance art or to think about it? Yes. The in-person aspect to it, right? It's originally like you are supposed to be there watching it and participating in it, right? But then it ends. It's gone so soon. Exactly. It's gone so soon. It kind of ends. It's not permanent. It's what we would call, so it's this word, ephemeral. I just realized I never actually use the chat very much. Ephemeral. It's ephemeral. It comes and goes. So we have to use what? Jessica, you had this, right? Yes, people have to be watching. Oh, good. Yes, Courtney. The photos, the video that's left, if you're lucky, if you're even lucky that someone actually took photos or took videos, because sometimes they're not, right? Like Ipur's this sorry for my suffering or sorry for suffering, there's only photos of it. There is no video of it, unfortunately. Not that I can find anyway. And you can see here in the background, right? She actually particularly, she had people there taking photos, right? That doesn't always happen. So those are things that we have to think about when we're trying to understand what was this artist wanting to do? What were they doing? What was important about the artwork itself or the performance? So let's try, based on this photograph, or these two photographs, let's try and work up a description here. So this is very different. When we're describing a performance art piece, it's different from what we've kind of done so far. It's has its own kind of language that you have to use. So let's think about some things here. What is she wearing? What is happening? And what is the public's reaction? Let's think about that for our description. What is she thinking? What is she thinking could also be part of the description as well. What are some things you would say if you were trying to describe what's going on with this performance? This is kind of difficult. What do you think? Good, good. A puffy fabric suit with limbs sticking out. Yeah, she has all these limbs here, there, and everywhere. Yes, like a combination of body parts, and it looks like she's walking around, moving the suit with her body. What seems to be the setting? Where is she? Where does she appear to be? It doesn't have to be specific, but just the general setting. Right, that's something you'll definitely want to touch on. What is the general setting? Yes, a busy street corner or a city street, downtown, populated street corner. Yes, exactly. And so she's standing there. She has this, this puffy limb suit on, right? She's on the street corner. Now we have to think about who's watching or who seems to be the audience in this particular moment. Yeah, business workers, businessmen. I think that's important there. The men part is important. Good, yes. Okay, good. And the public reaction, right? They seem to be disbelief. This is kind of getting interpretive, actually. Confusion, that's also a little bit interpretive. We'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, the bystanders, they want to look at it, but they don't at the same time. They're kind of trying to, yes, good, Piper, avoiding eye contact. They're kind of avoiding her, right? So let's talk about the suit a little bit more. So you can see we can get a little bit closer up with this photo. So what do you think the medium is? I think genre and style of the costume. I don't know if we can have well, you might be able to fit a particular genre to it. Not sure. But what are some things you would say? We said puffy suit, said it's red, there's a lot of appendages. What else? I think there's one thing that's missing. Good, yeah, foam and fabric. Yes, foam and fabric. Very good, thank you. Very abstract. Yeah, abstract is a way you could describe the genre or the style. It's very abstract. I would say probably like surreal inspired. Monster, very good. Yes, a monster costume. That's a great way of talking about it. John Carpenter's The Thing. I wonder, there might be some inspiration there, actually. I wonder if there is. There's one material that is really interesting about this that we haven't quite mentioned yet. Is grotesque. Yes, horror. Very good. Yeah, those are both good genres or styles. Genre or a stylistic way of describing. Grotesque is kind of a genre in a lot of ways with different styles. There's one kind of, I'll say shiny. Yeah, pins. There's like a sequin on it. There's actually a sequin on it. So there's kind of what would I say? Maybe a juxtaposition between the kind of like pretty sparkly material, right? And then the general grotesqueness of the entire suit, right? So that's something to think about. Maybe you can't really tell, but yeah, these are sequin here. that she put on. Good. All right, so now let's get to interpret. So here's some questions you might want to ask, we will ask when we're talking about interpreting. So what do you think is Ivor's message? Why do you think that's her message? Let's start with that. What do you think her message is here? What is she trying to do? What does she want what is she trying to convey to these people that are all watching her? In this scene, she's very much being watched. Yeah, that was one of the things here. She just wants to disrupt, on the one hand, she just wants to disrupt the status quo, right? She wants to just, yeah, get people to pay attention to her. She just wants to she wants to just distract people, right? Good. Yes, good. And AFAB bodies, I think that's very important here. For her, she's very interested in, I don't know, I don't think she probably knew much about gender theory and it's particularly like trans studies or anything. But she was definitely very interested in bodies assigned female at birth, these feminized bodies, and the way that these bodies assigned female at birth are treated and what is prescribed onto them. Right? You're supposed to do this kind of thing, and you're supposed to be this kind of way, right? Good. Yes, gender norms, exactly. Challenging gender norms, I think, right? And the oppression of women, right? Exactly. So, you know, instead of displaying herself as like this pretty kept, perfect looking woman, she's decided to do the exact opposite of that, right? And become grotesque and weird looking, right? Yeah, exactly, Allie. There's a sense that she just wants to make people comfortable, right? So, or make people uncomfortable, excuse me. She's very just interested in disruption and displeasing. Yes, displeasing the male gaze. Yes, exactly. Good. So, yes. Oh, good. Why this location? Very good point to talk about in an interpretation. She wishes to make oppression. She wants to make it visual. Yes, exactly. She wants the attention. This is a busy place. She wants people to look at her, to have to be forced to look at her, right? Good. And they're both active and neutral. Yeah, exactly. There's people who maybe they're not actively trying to maintain the status quo or oppress women or just people assigned female at birth generally. But you know, also the people who are neutral to it, they're just passive to it, right? And therefore maintaining that kind of status quo. So do you think that all these different messages that she's sending, do you think they get across to the audience? And if so, how or why? What would you think if you were someone who was walking around, if you were in this crowd of people? What would go through your mind? Because that's kind of like we were talking about, the relationship between the audience and the performer or the artist is integral to the performance art, right? So what do you think? Yeah, I would be caught off guard. Good, yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, exactly, me too. I would have a lot of questions, right? I mean, just me personally, I definitely think most people would be led away, would want to get away from this. I would be attracted to it, and I would, you know, I wouldn't necessarily get all of her personal political underlying messages, but I would appreciate the disruption of it in a lot of ways, just for my own, just because I like that. You know, I wouldn't necessarily know what her idea behind it is, but for me, I think I would be able to build my own message behind it. That's just me, though. Yeah, exactly. Impressed, off guard, good, shock. Yeah, the shock factor. Shock factor is huge with this performance art, particularly this artwork. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't probably know anything exactly what she's intending, but exactly, Gabrielle, you can take away, you know, I think just the act of feeling disrupted or discomforted is in itself a way for you to kind of take something from the artwork. So then here's the question. We'll talk about this in a moment. Oh, we already looked at that. All right. So here are some other works. So this is not just her only work that's very disruptive like this. This is actually my favorite one of her, which is called, it's called Abortion. So obviously we can't, unfortunately, we just don't have time to talk about it. And I think maybe it's a little taboo to talk about in a lot of ways too, although I would like to talk about it. Which she actually did. This was a little bit different. This is staged. She did this performance at a performance festival. And for like 3 hours a day, she would hang herself from the ceiling like this. I think it was like for 3 days in a row. And then she also has these kind of installation kind of works like this one, which is, I think it's supposed to be like Mount Pektu around a lake, but then it's raised. For some reason, it's escaping me right now. Anyways, so one thing to think about here is this idea of disrupting the status quo and trying to go against gender norms, right? How does that relate to tradition? What is Ipu's art? How does it relate to this idea of tradition? Because this is something, this question we've been asking a lot. And a lot of you picked up on this, I can tell in your blog posts, that there's this different way of relating to tradition between earlier and then the 1990s, right? Yeah. For Ipu, I don't think she wants to contradict it, right? What do you think? Do you see any kind of maybe appropriation or inspiration of tradition in her work at all? Subvert, that's a good word. I like that word a lot. Subvert. She wants to subvert tradition, right? She wants us to get away from what tradition usually wants us to do, right? Yeah, deconstruct it. She wants to expose tradition. She wants to expose the workings of tradition and how power particularly works in tradition, especially related to gender, but also sexuality and also medium, right? Yeah, de-romanticize tradition. Yeah, exactly. Yes, good. And by using her own body, she is subverting tradition in a lot of ways, right? Where the artist themselves is the artwork in a lot of ways. So that's, again, it goes to that form and content both are kind of against tradition when we're talking about Ipu, right? Good. So are there any questions about performance art or Ipu or anything like that? I think this is, yeah. She's definitely one of my favorite artists. If you're someone like me, you really like contemporary art, you can look her up. She has a lot of videos on YouTube, just not of there is a video of abortion, some that I've seen. It's not on YouTube though, but you can probably find it. Okay. So let's talk about on the other end, right? We have this guy, Sodoho. So, I thought this was, so what are some of the things about Sodoho's work that stood out to you? It doesn't just have to be the fabric architecture, but just his work in general, things he deals with, what he's interested in, where he works. Memory. Yes, he's very interested in memory, right? Exactly. Yeah, I think almost everything he's made, even if it's not the fabric architecture, at some point he relates it back to a memory of some kind, whether it's a collective memory or an individual memory. We'll talk about that. Good. Yeah, he's very inspired by that, right? Good. Right. So how would you categorize, what kind of art do you think these fabric architecture things are? Like what kind of art do you think? Maybe genre or medium? Okay, sculpture is definitely possible. Anti-monumentalism. I don't quite know what you mean. I can kind of get an idea of what you mean, but I'm not quite sure, Jessica. Installation. Yes, good. So I think sculpture or installation are both fine. Textile sculpture, absolutely, that's a great word for it. You can use either of those. Fabric sculpture, totally fine as well. right? There's, so installation art, what seems to be the most important thing about the idea of an installation, though? And just to talk about it briefly, not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily relate to artwork, but what is installation art? I should put that as a question here. So it does encompass the viewer. It is immersive. There's something about the intent of an installation piece, though, of an installation artwork. Good, yes. So it's intended to occupy a specific space. That is what is most important about, or what really is like the element or the idea behind an installation artwork. So it typically, not always, but typically an installation artwork is made just to be in this particular space. In this case, the fabric architectural gates, not necessarily, but some of them are. He makes them for particular museums or for particular galleries. Sometimes he does. Good. All right. So let's try and describe, again, this is a little bit different from things that we've described so far. What are some things you would say? What about the material, the size, the composition of these kinds of this gate particularly? That's at the Seattle Art Museum. So what are some things you would describe about it? Yes, it definitely has a central composition, right? Good. It has a central composition around what? Around what? Exactly. Good. So that's kind of the content of it. It's an installation art piece that is inspired by his home from childhood. We'll talk about that in a moment. It is constantly changing. Yes, that's true. Okay, let's talk about the different media that are represented here, right? Okay, yes, good. Material. Sheer thin fabric. You can see the way that it folds and the different shading, right? So he has this gate here, right? That's made of fabric. And then what do they do over top of it? You remember, this is kind of the important part. So I don't know if it's silk or not. Projector, yes, they project a video over it, right? So there's two different media going on here. We have the fabric, this thin fabric gate, and then we have a video that's projected over it. And then what kind of stuff, what kind of video, what kind of images are in that are projected on top of it? No, the gate. So, okay, yes, good question. All right, let's break it down here. So this gate, let me get my annotation. So this gate that we see here, this is fabric. This is fabric. And then behind the gate is this white projection screen that's hanging from the ceiling. Well, it's all hanging from the ceiling. And they have a video projector that's about where probably the photo was taken, that's projecting onto it these different videos of the birds flying, the animals. Yeah, I know it gets confusing when you have a lot of different elements to something, right? It has the birds, there's deer, animals, mostly it's animals. There is one other thing too, right? Good. And then it's all centered around this gate, this door here. So in Korean, you don't really need to know this, but it is kind of important to understand the way the idea of a door works in Korean. So the word is mun, and it's from a Chinese character that can mean door, but it can also mean gate. There's no discrepancy in this character between the idea. It's just like entryway is what this character means. And so that's why it kind of functions in these multiple ways. Just think about it as like the entryway is the center here of this entire composition, right? Okay, So let's look at some of the things. Good. Oh, okay. So here's something that was used in it. These are plum blossoms. And what do you notice? Where was this image taken from? What kind of artwork is this? And what is an ink painting? Good. And what era is it from? It's an ink painting. Sorry, I should have put that on the slide. But is this like a modern contemporary ink painting? Yeah, Joseon period. This is a quote unquote traditional ink painting, right? It's Korean, it's Joseon, right? So there's traditional ink painting. He also has these crows here. But these crows, what do you notice about them? So what kind of artwork is this? This is here in the back. And from where and from what time is it? Yeah, this is Edo period, which is Japan. Yeah, this is not Korea. Um, exactly. But yeah, the folding is good. The folding screen. This is a folding screen. There are folding screens everywhere in East Asia, but particularly in Japan, there's like a lot of them. And they all have this gold leaf background, which is important, right? Yeah, but this is not Korean. This is Edo period. But is it traditional, do you think, in some way? Or do you think people call it traditional? Early 17th century. That's pretty old. I mean, it's not really that old in the grand scheme of things, but it is older, right? Sorry, can we hear me? Yeah, I think, yeah, this is definitely traditional. And you think of like, if you know, well, we do have a class called Japanese painting. If you take it, you'll see this idea of the gold leaf folding screen is considered like traditional Japanese art, very much so, right? Good. And then we have his house in Seoul. Yeah, there definitely is a lot of when you really look at these kind of artworks, I agree. I tend to see a lot of kind of modern things that we usually think of as modern to also be in them as well. Um, you know, but we'll talk about the discrepancy in a bit. Okay, let's talk about the house in Seoul. So he grew up, or his parents' house in Seoul is a quote unquote traditional Korean house, which in Korean is called a hanok. Han meaning Korean people and ok meaning house. Has anyone ever been to a hanok or been in a hanok before? For those of us a few of us have been to Korea, I think, right? Because there's something particular about it. So what we call hanok today is, people say it's traditional. It's a traditional Korean house, but it's more like traditional inspired. Is how I would say it. And that's because usually it's just the architecture, right? So what kind of seems maybe traditional? I think I have a better view. What kind of seems maybe traditional about the architecture of this kind of house? What do you think? This is very blurry, I just realized. You can kind of get an idea. You don't have to have an extensive knowledge of Korean architecture to kind of figure out what seems kind of traditional. Yeah, the roof. The roof is particularly, so these are stone tile roof, right? So they're actually tiles laid on each other into this structure. And there's a gate. Yes, there's a gate around the entire perimeter, a stone gate. Right, exactly. Good. And then the other thing that's kind of traditional about it is that although it is called house, it is not a single building. It's not a single house. It's multiple little houses or little buildings that are all within this gated off gate in this gated courtyard, if you will, right? And each of the houses has its own name, and each one is supposed to be 4 different things, right? So, but the difference is that they're not number one, they're not as big as an actual like Joseon era estate, because that's what these originally were, is they were estates. And then the other thing is that they have a lot of amenities that were not typical, or not in like Joseon period. Also, like they have bathrooms that are like modern, and they have running water and electricity usually too. So I'm not sure if the ones his parents' house grew up in, or his parents' house does, but I assume that it does. Okay. All right. So then we have this other one that he talked about a lot, right? And he has this quote here, which I think is really interesting. We talk about memory. What we are is all about memories. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you agree with that statement? This is his artist philosophy. Yeah, maybe. What we are is all about memories. Why? Why is what we are all about memories? What does he seem to think? Definitely, yeah. Our past is definitely important to who we are, who we become. Memory, I definitely think it provides a sense of self. Good. It's so. Yeah, what I think one thing about it is yeah, I think there's one thing about it is um maybe we don't want to get caught up in memories too much, right? I think, yeah, oh, great. Yes, right. We want to be thinking about the future, and we want to be in the present. I mean, this is just me, I guess. But I think we want to be in the present. I want to be in the present too, so I can feel like I'm relating to what I'm actually living in the moment, not just what has happened to me in the past, right? So I think that's one thing about this idea of memory, which is really consistent throughout the world among different artists. But one thing that I tend to critique about it in some ways. Okay, so let's just talk about this one briefly. So what's the medium for this one, right? Let's talk about the color, especially. He uses this very particular color, right? And why do you think he would use this color? This blue fabric. I think this blue fabric is relevant. Why did he use it? Yes, cerulean blue, good. I also like the way a lot of us are starting to use qualifiers for things like colors or lines and stuff like that. Like, especially with the ceramic object, many of you put effort into trying to be more descriptive by using like similes and metaphors, right? Yes, good. I think blue of blueprints, right? He's calling it blueprint. Um, yeah. It definitely looks like how it would look on a blueprint, right? Good. I think also, what kind of what do you associate blue with a lot of the time? I think he kind of associates it with, yeah, nostalgia. I think so too, or sadness, the kind of longing. We tend to associate blue with that, right? Good. Yeah, let's talk about, okay, what about the composition of this one? This one is different, right? This one is composed differently from Gage. So what is different about this one? Foremost, I think he included something in this one that is not a part of Gate. Can you kind of figure out or notice what it is that's included? So Okay, so it's lifted up off the ground, yes. It has the door and the address number. Yeah, there's some like finite details like this. Is this just the door or is this something else too? There's something more to this one. Yeah, it definitely feels more inaccessible. I agree. There's a distance. The stairs, yeah. He's trying to capture, it really is supposed to be like a blueprint, right? He's trying to capture the apartment, not just the doorway, but the entire kind of apartment and the way it looks. And what's really important is what's going on down here, right? What does he include down here, and how does that relate to his memory? Why is that significant to him? Do you remember from the video? Why is there all this stuff going on down here? Because this is kind of a hard detail, an important detail to include, but it kind of gets obstructed, right? Do you remember why that? Yes, exactly. He lived in the basement and his landlord lived above. Exactly. This was his extra space down here. He's referencing that, right? By including this enclosed area under the door or under the stairs, right? So he's kind of trying to evoke that aspect of his memory of like being under something, right? Good. All right. So we already kind of started comparing these, right? So what are some of the differences and similarities between what is like, let's try one difference and one similarity between the two. What do you think? I'll give you a hint. You'll probably see this question at some point. Same material, yes, the thin fabric, similar technique, right? It's good. Blueprint is very vibrant and Gate feels like less, more, I don't know, kind of wispy or something, like faded. Good. Yeah, very muted. There you go. Muted is a good way. Yeah, Blueprint is very blue, that very vibrant cerulean blue, like a blueprint, and gray, and then Gate is very gray. I think it's actually purple, like a kind of very faint purple if you see it in real life. The scale, I think the scale is pretty different. I think the Blueprint is very, very large compared to Gate. Gate is like you can actually walk through it, right? And it feels very, very much like you're walking through a gate, where I think Blueprint is a little bit different. It feels very large. Good. Good, yes. And so they both are about home, right? They're both about homes that he's lived in. Good. But there's a difference. Yes. And the difference lies in here, what Gabrielle says. One is kind of these contemporary, very contemporary kind of idea of a home. And then this other one, Gate, is more about, it's definitely contemporary notion, but it's very inspired by tradition, right? Good. Yes, the bases are different. Again, so the way the audience interacts with the two is different, right? So like we were saying, this one you can't, as an audience member, as a viewer, you're kind of set apart from it through the stairs, right? But then Gate, you're welcomed into it. Yeah, exactly, Jessica. You feel unwelcomed and alienated from this one. I definitely agree. Whereas Gate, you're very much invited to go through the piece, try it out. You know, what does it feel like to go under this gate, right? Good. All right. So let's compare Sodoho and Ipur. So let's actually talk briefly. Well, yeah. So how are their ideas about tradition similar and different? So I think the different one is obvious. What is Sodoho's take on tradition? What do you think? What is Sodoho's take on tradition? Warped to create a new narrative. Maybe you could explain, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what you mean by that. Okay, good. So Saw is definitely interested in Korean and Japanese painting, pre-modern painting, kind of considered traditional. Good. Okay. What else? What's his attitude towards tradition? How about that? What's his attitude towards tradition? Respect. Okay, I like that. He's respectful of tradition. Definitely respectful in a lot of ways. Good, yes. And he has this thing where tradition is very influential to him. He's interested in seeing the way tradition is inflected in our experiences today. Good. Yes, exactly. He's more lighter, nostalgic mood toward it. Yeah. Very reminiscent, good, and honoring the past. Very good. And Ipur is, like we're saying here, yeah, opposite of that, right? She wants to challenge tradition. She wants to, I don't necessarily, I think she wants to do away with it in some ways, but I think she also just wants to subvert certain aspects of it in a lot of ways, right? She is not interested in trying to explore it and come to terms with it in the way that Sodoho kind of is, right? Yeah, Sodoho romanticizes it in a lot of ways. You can see he's very romanticized, right? Yeah. Oh, yes. Very good. Yes, Dimitri. That's a good point. So specifically talks about how he feels like his work is continuing history, right? He says that specifically. Like he feels like his work is a part of this line of history. Whereas I don't think she's very interested in that at all, right? She wants to be, she doesn't want to necessarily be new, but she wants to challenge that line of history. She doesn't want to be a part of it in a lot of ways. She wants to change it, right? Good, and deconstruct tradition, yeah. I don't know if Saw is very deconstructive of tradition, right? I think he's deconstructive of like memory, but I'm not necessarily tradition. He's very appropriative of it and respectful in that way. Good. All right. And now here's the other question. How does their art relate to Korea? How does their art relate to Korea? And what makes their art Korean art? What do you think? What makes their art Korean art? Respect comparatively. There's not one answer. They both have kind of different kind of ways of being that. What do you think? What is Korean about their art, or how does it relate to Korea? So there's no right or wrong answers. There's no right or wrong answers. It's kind of just kind of what we think. Good. Yes. Okay, great, Piper. Yeah. So their art definitely relates to the struggle between past and present, or tradition and present, tradition and future, old and new, right? In Korea, and the way that in Korea, generally speaking, people are trying to deal with that. And I agree with that. But I actually am not sure if it's just in Korea, because where are their artworks? Where is their art happening? And transforming what it means to be Korean. I think so too. Yeah, in a lot of ways, it is. Good. And elements of Korean tradition, calling out aspects of it. Good. What's kind of the catch though? There's something I think that's a little bit different. Think about the idea of global. Is what they're talking about specific to, maybe it has those kind of elements like you're both saying, right, of Korean tradition, right, in them. But they're doing, yes, very good, Dimitri. So Ipur, I don't think we clarified this. Ipur did this performance in Japan. Ipoi did this performance in Japan. Sodo Ho, he has art in Korea, but mostly his art is not in Korea. It's in Europe and in North America. Yes, exactly. Good. These kinds of struggles can be seen everywhere, right? Exactly. You know, there's this issue between generations, young generation and old generation, right? Good. What other kind of issues can be seen everywhere that they talk about, right? So memory, deconstructing gender norms, deconstructing just the status quo in general. Are these specific to Korea, or are they more just anywhere, you know? What do you think? All right, following along. Okay, so do we kind of see, yes. So is the idea of memory in Sodoho's artwork, is that just specific, is that specific to like Korea? Or is that specific to him as someone who is Korean, like the fact that he's Korean? Is the idea of breaking down the status quo and challenging gender norms, challenging the way that women and people assigned female at birth bodies are policed, or what's prescribed onto them. Exactly. Good. Okay, we're getting to the point here, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, unlike the art that we've looked at so far, which is specifically, the ideas behind them are more or less specific to Korea, whether it's North or South, right? The ideas or the underpinning inspirations and morals for the art from these kinds of contemporary artists is not just about Korea. Yes, it's rooted in their experience as people who either grow up in Korea, but there's something global about it. There's something more universal about it. Exactly. Exactly. So we have to start thinking in a way that's a little bit different from how we have been thinking. At once, we have to think, okay, well, you know, the fact that they're Korean or they're coming from Korea is important, but at the same time, they're trying to talk to these more global issues or universal issues, right? Does that make sense? Do you kind of see the discrepancy here between the way we've talked about like Minjung art or like art during the Japanese colonial period versus what is kind of the point of the art that they're making? Yes, very good. Yeah, and this is the issue. Very good, Gabrielle. This is a very big issue because particularly when we're looking from when we're in North America, when we look at Korean art that's supposedly Korean art, we want to see it as Korean, right? So that's the whole thing we were talking about last week, right? Trying to look at Korean art. And so it's definitely Korean because Korean artists are making it, right? But the underlying ideas are not just specific to Korea, right? Okay, good. Okay, let's see. Broader context, good. Good, okay, there's a broader context to it, exactly. Exactly. Exactly, very good, Daniel. Very well put, very well put. Don't people usually associate housing with wealth? And maybe he's trying to focus on memories of place to shape. You know that I think. So yeah, these particular like the apartments are not necessarily associated with wealth. Um, Strangely, Hano kind of are because they're usually like designed specifically, designers specifically. There are certain designer apartments that are associated with wealth, but generally speaking, most people in the middle class, even lower middle class, they do live in apartments. But then people who live at the very bottom, like if you've ever seen Parasite, like they lived in that underground like basement apartment, you know, like that's the cheapest of the cheap. So definitely true, Lizzie. And there's something there about it. I'm not sure he's ever talked about that, but I'm sure he has some ideas about it. Good. Okay. So I had one last question, but I think we'll just kind of stop here. All right. So we can just kind of end here. I think it's 7:15, right? If you have any questions, you're welcome to stay back and talk to me. Otherwise, you are free to go. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I hope you have a nice night.
You too, Magnus. Thank you. Thank you all. Do this. Who is here? Bye, Daniel.